After my divorce, it felt as if the vibrant colors of my life had faded. The days had turned into a monotonous series of encounters with myself. I had grown accustomed to solitude. It had become my companion, quiet and unnoticeable, filling every minute. But deep down, I knew I needed something more. Something that would make me feel the taste of life again. "Mom, you have to come," Henry said one evening, standing in the doorway of my apartment. He looked excited, almost elated. "There's a literary event at our bookstore tonight, a private gathering for insiders. You've always loved these things, and it would be good for you to get out of the house." I wanted to refuse, citing exhaustion and the desire to be alone. But there was something in my son's eyes that made me pause. He had never asked me to go anywhere with him before. For a 20-year-old young man, this was at least unusual. But he smiled, and suddenly I realized I couldn't say no. "All right, Henry, I'll come," I finally said, trying to hide the uncertainty in my voice. When I walked into the store, I was struck by the relaxed atmosphere and the energy. Everywhere there were young people laughing, chatting, and discussing books with such enthusiasm that it felt like I had stepped into a different reality. I felt out of place, like I was here by mistake. Noticing my discomfort, Henry quickly came over to me. "Mom, are you okay?" He leaned closer to drown out the noise. "Let me introduce you to Logan. He's a good friend of mine. We work together." I nodded, trying to hide my confusion. At that moment, I didn't know that meeting Logan would change everything. He was taller than me, with thick dark hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to search for something inside me. Logan extended his hand, and his smile was both friendly and slightly daring. "Elizabeth, nice to meet you." His voice was warm and melodic, instantly calming my nerves. "Nice to meet you too, Logan," I replied, shaking his hand. The warmth from his touch lingered longer than it should have. Talking to him turned out to be surprisingly easy. We discussed books, travel, art. He listened attentively, his eyes shining with interest, and I felt I was speaking to someone who genuinely cared about what I thought and felt. He was sincere, direct, but there was something else in his gaze, something I couldn't define. "You speak about literature as if it's more than just a hobby," he said, and I sensed a soft provocation in his words, as if books are your way of living. I smiled, surprised at the accuracy of his words. "Books. They have always been more than just pages to me. They're a way to understand myself," I replied, feeling my heart begin to beat a little faster. Logan watched me closely, his gaze intense, and I realized I liked this attention. How many years had it been since I felt interesting to someone? When I left the bookstore late that evening, the cold wind hit my face. Bewildered, excited, something burned in my chest, something forgotten, long buried under layers of habits and fears. I didn't understand what had caused this feeling, whether it was the meeting itself or Logan. But I already knew that this evening would remain in my memory for a long time. A few days after the meeting at the bookstore, I couldn't get Logan out of my head. There was no room for randomness in my life. Everything was planned and neatly arranged. But now it felt like chance had entered my life to disrupt this order. His gaze, his words, even the tone of his voice, all of it kept haunting me. I felt ridiculous. A grown woman shouldn't be getting flustered over a young man, her son's friend. But thoughts of Logan kept stubbornly returning. That day, I decided to take a walk along the riverbank to clear my head. The air was fresh and cold. The sound of the river was calming, and the golden leaves swirled in the air, somehow emphasizing my slight unease. I stepped into a small cafe I often visited to warm up with a cup of hot tea. Inside it was warm and cozy. The scent of freshly baked pastries filled the air, inviting me to forget about everything, if only for a moment. And then I saw him. Logan was sitting at a corner table, engrossed in a book as if the whole world around him had ceased to exist. I froze, but he had already looked up and noticed me. His face lit up with an unexpected smile, as if my appearance brought him joy. "Elizabeth," he waved at me, inviting me to join him. I hesitated for just a second, and then, overcoming my internal resistance, approached his table. "What a surprising coincidence," I said, trying to appear calm, although something inside me was trembling. "I guess we're both looking for a quiet place to think." He smirked and closed the book. "How's your day going?" "Unusual," I replied, barely holding back a smile. I didn't expect to see a familiar face here. We began talking. This time, our topics were deeper and more personal. Logan shared his favorite books, how he found himself through literature, how he lost, and then rediscovered his faith in people. I shared my stories, laughing at the ridiculous situations from my youth, and suddenly I felt how easy it was to be around him, as if I was once again the girl who believed in dreams. When Logan suddenly said he had a surprise for me, I tensed slightly. He took a small, worn-out collection of poems from his bag and handed it to me. "I found this recently in a second-hand bookstore," he explained, "and I thought you might like—" I opened the book and noticed a bookmark. On that page was a poem I had known by heart since my youth. Logan asked me to read it aloud. At first I was embarrassed, but then, succumbing to his persistence, I began to read. The words, familiar and so dear, suddenly took on a new sound. I felt my voice tremble slightly with excitement. When I finished, Logan leaned closer. "Your words," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the noise of the cafe. "They sound like music." I looked up and met his gaze. There was something in his eyes that made me freeze. Slowly, as if everything around had ceased to exist, he leaned in. I felt his hand gently touch mine. My heart raced, and in the next second, his lips softly brushed against mine. The kiss was so light, almost imperceptible, like the flutter of a butterfly's wings. But inside, everything turned upside down. The moment was brief, but it was filled with such tenderness and warmth that I felt my fears and doubts momentarily vanish. I quickly pulled back, feeling confused and embarrassed. But he continued to look at me with a strange mix of surprise and satisfaction. "Logan," I began, not knowing what to say, but he just smiled as if everything that had happened was natural. "Sorry if that was too much," he said. Though there was no trace of regret in his voice, it just felt right. I didn't know how to respond. That kiss had awakened feelings in me that I had long buried. I stood up, saying I had to leave, and hurried toward the exit, feeling my heart still pounding in my chest. When I stepped outside, the cold air brought me back to reality. I felt embarrassed and excited at the same time. No one had looked at me the way Logan did in a very long time, and though I knew I should I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, a moment of weakness that shouldn't be taken seriously. But every morning, as I opened my eyes, I found myself thinking about Logan again and again. His smile, his eyes that seemed to see right through me. I tried to avoid the places where we might accidentally run into each other, but fate seemed to be playing with me. One evening, as I was returning from work, my phone suddenly rang. It was Logan. I wasn't sure whether to answer, but before I could think it through, I had already picked up. "Elizabeth?" "Hi." His voice was soft and calm. "I know you might be avoiding me, and I understand why. But I would like to invite you to an event on the rooftop of an old building. I'm sure you'll love it. Just give me a chance." Conflicting feelings raged inside me, the desire to see him again, and the fear of what it might mean. But his voice, with that confidence and tenderness, won me over. "All right," I said, almost in a whisper, hardly believing my own words. "I'll come." By the time I reached the place, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in fiery shades. The staircase leading to the roof was old and creaked underfoot, but I kept moving forward, driven by curiosity and some inexplicable attraction. When I reached the top, I saw Logan standing by the parapet, looking out over the city. The wind tousled his hair, and his eyes sparkled with a hidden mystery. "Thank you for coming," he said, turning to me. There was so much sincerity in his voice that I couldn't help but smile. We approached the edge of the roof, where a breathtaking view of the night city unfolded. Logan spoke about his childhood, about how his parents had died in an accident when he was still a child, how he grew up in foster homes, learning to survive in a harsh world that gave him no breaks. I looked at him and realized that I was standing before a man who had gone through more than many of us do in a lifetime. "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong to this world," he said quietly, "like I'm just an observer, searching for my place among strangers." His words were unexpected, and I felt my heart tighten with compassion and a strange desire to comfort him. I wanted to say something, but instead I just placed my hand on his shoulder. He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw the same uncertainty that was in mine. We were so close that I could feel his breath on my face. My heart beat faster, and in that moment he slowly leaned in and kissed me. This kiss was completely different, deeper, more passionate, as if behind it were years of unexpressed emotions and desires. I felt his hands gently slide over my shoulders, pulling me closer, and all my fears, doubts, and common sense melted away in that moment. He was tender but insistent, and I responded to him, losing myself in this warmth, I felt as if the world around us had stopped. There was only this moment, this city beneath our feet, this air filled with the scent of the freshness and spring coolness, and us. I didn't think about what would happen next. I just allowed myself to be here in this moment. When the kiss ended, I felt my knees slightly buckle. Logan was looking at me, his eyes full of tenderness and a quiet triumph. I don't know what to say, I whispered, feeling my cheeks flush. You don't need to, he replied, smiling. I just wanted to be near you. But at that very moment, I felt a sudden chill in my chest. Reality crashed down on me all at once. I was a mother, a woman older than him by so many years, the friend of his best friend. What was I doing? This was madness. I stepped back, putting distance between us. Logan, this is wrong, I said, trying to stay calm, though inside everything screamed otherwise. We shouldn't continue this. He didn't reply immediately. A shadow of disappointment flickered in his eyes, but he didn't try to hold me back. He just nodded and quietly said, "If that's what you think, I understand." I turned away, trying to hold on to what remained of my resolve. As I descended the stairs, I felt the conflict tearing me apart inside. That kiss had been beautiful, but something inside me told me that I had just crossed a line I should never have crossed. And yet, as I walked out onto the street, I knew one thing. This was not the end. I could try to run from it, but some part of me already knew I wouldn't be able to resist this pull for long. Several days had passed since that evening on the rooftop, but thoughts of Logan wouldn't leave me alone. Anytime I closed my eyes, I kept remembering that kiss, his gaze, his words. It was as if I stood on the edge of a cliff and my heart was screaming, "Jump!" while my mind was saying, "Stop, don't do it." I tried to suppress these feelings, but they only grew stronger. I decided I wouldn't meet him again. I had to put an end to it, once and for all. I knew it was the right thing to do. The thoughts of Logan tormented me, but I understood that I couldn't let myself fall in love with someone younger than my own son. That would be wrong, unfair to Henry. I couldn't risk our relationship for the sake of this fleeting passion. But Logan didn't give up. He kept sending me messages, short ones, asking how I was feeling, sharing his thoughts, talking about the books he was reading. These messages were so simple and light-hearted that I couldn't help but respond. At some point, he began appearing in places I often visited, during my morning runs at the cafe I went to every Saturday. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, but a deep sense of anxiety slowly began to grow. One evening, when I returned home, Henry was waiting for me in the kitchen. His face was grim, his eyes glinting with some kind of irritation. "Mom, can I have a minute?" he asked, not looking up from the coffee cup he was nervously spinning in his hands. "Of course, Henry, what's wrong?" I replied, trying to sound calm, though I already sensed something unpleasant was coming. "You've been acting strange lately. You're always disappearing somewhere, and you hardly talk to me." He shot me a quick glance. "Is this about Logan?" My heart pounded loudly in my chest. Had he found out something? "Logan," I tried to sound as casual as possible. "We've just been chatting a bit." "He's your friend, Henry. Why are you so worried?" "Mom," his voice was firm, almost accusatory. I overheard Logan talking to one of his friends. "He's not who he seems. He has problems, and I don't want him dragging you into his mess." I felt a cold fear gripping me. Could it all be true? I remembered those chance encounters, his persistence, those unexpected coincidences. What kind of problems? I tried to ask calmly, but my voice trembled. "Debts," Henry replied sharply, "and not small ones. He's already tried borrowing money from friends several times, and now he knows you're well. Mom, I'm just afraid he's using you." His words struck me like lightning. Could Logan really do such a thing? Could he be with someone like me just for money? But everything about his behavior, his words, his gestures, were they all lies? "Henry, I understand you're worried," I said, trying to calm both him and myself. "But I don't think Logan is capable of that. He's always been honest with me." "You don't know him at all, Mom." Henry said quietly but firmly, "I just ask you to be careful." I felt fear and anxiety building inside me. I couldn't believe that Logan could be like that. But at the same time, I understood that Henry might be right. I needed to figure it out myself. The next day, I received an anonymous letter. It had no signature, but there was a warning. "Be careful with Logan. He's not who he claims to be. I felt a chill run through me. His words seemed to confirm Henry's fears, but I didn't know who to trust. That evening, I decided to meet with Logan to talk to him openly. I couldn't keep living in doubt and suspicion. I needed to hear the truth from him directly. I sent him a message asking to meet at the cafe where we often went. His reply came almost immediately. "Of course, Elizabeth, I'll be there." When I entered the cafe, he was already waiting for me. He stood up when he saw me, and his eyes lit up with joy. But I couldn't bring myself to smile back. I saw warmth and tenderness in his gaze, but my doubts tormented me. "Logan," I began sitting down across from him. "I need to know something. You owe me the truth." He frowned, his face becoming serious. "What do you mean, Elizabeth?" He asked cautiously. "What are your problems? About your debts? About whether you might be using me for money?" I tried to say this calmly, though inside everything screamed in pain and doubt. For a moment, he seemed lost, but then he pulled himself together. "I do have problems," he confessed quietly, "but I've never used you, Elizabeth. Everything I've said has been true. My feelings for you are real. I only wanted you to be happy, to feel once again that life can be bright." I looked at him, trying to determine if he was lying, but his eyes were open and there was no trace of deceit in them. Still, something inside me resisted. I realized I had been caught in a whirlwind with no easy way out. After the conversation at the cafe, I returned home feeling conflicted. Then swore his feelings were genuine, that he wasn't trying to use me. But I saw his hesitation when I mentioned money, his faltering and indecision in his answer. Could he really be lying? And if so, what had been true in our meetings, in his words, in those kisses that had revived? I couldn't sleep all night, tossing and turning in bed, contemplating every possible scenario. Henry also wouldn't leave my thoughts, as if he foresaw that something bad was about to happen. By morning, I realized that I had to clarify this situation once and for all. I couldn't remain in limbo. Not for myself, not for my son. Soon I received another anonymous letter. This time it contained photographs. Logan talking to a stranger who handed him an envelope. Logan at an ATM withdrawing money. Logan with a woman in an expensive restaurant. Each image seemed like further proof that he was living a double life. I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. Had I been so wrong about him? I decided to make a surprise visit to Logan. I knew where he lived, but I had never been to his home. This step was decisive but necessary. I needed to see him in his own space, in his real life, to understand who he really was. As I approached his house, my heart pounded loudly. I knocked on the door, and almost immediately I heard footsteps on the other side. Logan opened the door, and his face showed surprise and concern. "Elizabeth?" His voice trembled. "What are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I need to talk to you, Logan, and I want to do it here." Now, without masks and without anything left unsaid, I replied, trying not to let my anxiety show. Logan stepped aside, inviting me in. His apartment was modest, even a bit shabby. It didn't match the lifestyle depicted in the photographs from the letter. The air smelled of coffee and dust, and papers and books were scattered across the table. "Listen, I understand how you feel," he began, closing the door behind me, "but you have to trust me. I'm not who you think I am." "Trust you?" I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. "Logan, I was sent photographs of you with some people, with women, with money. What is this? Who are these people? Why didn't you tell me about them?" His face turned pale and his eyes froze with confusion. "Photographs?" he repeated, and there was genuine alarm in his voice. "Who sent you these?" I handed him the envelope with the pictures. He looked at them and pressed his lips into a thin line. His eyes flickered with something unreadable, a mix of fear and anger. "These are old acquaintances of mine," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "People I would rather not deal with, but sometimes circumstances force you to. I did have financial problems, I won't deny that, but I never used you for money, Elizabeth. These people, they are my debts, my shadow from the past that I'm trying to escape. But they won't leave me alone." I looked at him, trying to discern if he was lying, but his voice sounded too sincere, too certain. Yet everything inside me was screaming that this couldn't be true. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you trust me with your problems?" I asked, desperately seeking answers to my questions. "I didn't want to involve you," he replied, his voice trembling. "You're so bright, so pure. I didn't want the shadows of my past to touch you." I didn't know how to say it. At that moment, the door to the apartment suddenly opened and Henry walked in. He looked clearly agitated, as if he had run all the way here. What's going on here? His voice was sharp, almost accusatory. Mom, what are you doing here? Henry, were you following me? I blurted out. I wanted to protect you. He almost shouted. I knew you'd meet him again. Mom, he's lying to you. I know it. I heard them talking. They were talking about you, about your money. Logan raised his hands in a calming gesture. Wait, Henry, that's not true. You misunderstood. Logan, I'm tired of guessing what's true and what's a lie. I said, feeling tears well up in my eyes. You said you have feelings for me, that you want to be with me, but now I don't know whether to believe it. Logan took a step forward, reaching his hand toward my shoulder, but I stepped back. A look of pain flickered in his eyes. Elizabeth, please don't leave me. Give me a chance to explain. His voice was hoarse, filled with desperation, but I felt something inside me tighten, as if I had been betrayed again. I can't, I whispered. I need time to think, to figure things out. I turned and walked out of the apartment, feeling Henry follow me. Logan didn't try to stop me. He just watched me leave with an expression of loss and hopelessness. My heart was breaking, but I knew I could no longer live in this whirlwind of doubts and mistrust. I had to put an end to it. But where? I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that.